Hey, this is Web3 Talks. The rule of this podcast is simple. We only talk with people who have hands-on Web3 building experience. So if you are a hacker, entrepreneur, or investor, you can get inspired by their stories, lessons, and fuck-ups. My name is Mac, and I'm hosting this pod. If you want to stay in touch, go to twitter.com/Web3Talks, click the link in the pinned tweet, and join our Discord community. Let's go. Before we start, I have some announcement, because if you want to follow Web3 Talks, you obviously can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever you like. But you can also subscribe to emails. And in these emails, first of all, you are sure that you will get info about the new episode, because you check emails more often than you check Apple Podcast, for sure. And also, I will include some main lessons from each episode, so you can get this kind of like a teaser. If you want to subscribe, you will see the link in description. It's like paragraph.xyz/@Canva. Why Canva? You can read it inside. And this is a very good moment to announce it, because today's guest is Colin Armstrong, who is co-founder of Paragraph. And Paragraph is like a Web3 Substack. So you have all the things that you have in Substack. You can post blog posts, you can send emails to your newsletter subscribers, but you can also let people subscribe with wallets, and you can token gate some posts. And what's really cool, you can also host your posts on Airwave. So they are censorship resistant and they will always be there. So what I like about Paragraph is that it's like somewhere between Web 2 and Web 3. So it has all things about Web 2 and Web 3 on top, which I think is the way. So Colin, glad to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that intro, Mac. Happy to be on the podcast.
So Colin, we always start with a background. And here I'm really curious, because I have no idea what's the backstory of Paragraph. So if you could tell me, what's your professional background and why have you started this particular project?
Sure. Yeah, happy to get into it. So I started getting into cryptocurrency over a decade ago. I started getting into Bitcoin around 2011. I started with mining on a gaming desktop that I had back when it was possible to mine for a consumer. After I mined it, I started building some basic web apps on top of it. I was very interested in what it enabled, what it meant for creators, etc. One of the web apps I built was a marketplace for buying and selling digital goods. Certainly NFTs did not exist a decade ago. So digital goods we dealt with were like ebooks or online MP3s. Ethereum came out shortly after that. And again, I started building on top of it and was very interested in again, how that sort of changed things for creators, what it meant for them. So I started playing around with it, building a bunch of stuff on top of it. Eventually, I think this was 2014 now, I went to MIT for a hackathon, took a bus from Toronto to Boston just by myself, didn't know anybody. But I had a very strong desire to build something on top of Ethereum and meet other sort of like-minded folks. So met up with a group of other people who were also into cryptocurrency. We built a distributed Kickstarter where it was pretty much entirely on chain. People could raise money for something, for an idea, and then the funds were released once sort of the fundraise completed. So we ended up winning 2 cryptocurrency awards. One of them was sponsored by Coinbase. So that led me to meeting a bunch of the folks at Coinbase, and then that led to interviewing there. And then that led to working there for a short stint. I worked on payments and anti-abuse there. I improved their Bitcoin private key signing infrastructure and then helped launch Coinbase in Canada, which I was particularly excited for because I'm Canadian. The state of crypto in Canada wasn't, I think, great at the time in 2014, 2015. So after Coinbase, I think Coinbase was just fantastic. It was kind of my first foray into crypto from a professional standpoint. So it was awesome to see. My manager was Charlie Lee, creator of Litecoin. There was a lot of the OGs, I think, at the time that I got the chance to work with, which was phenomenal. So after Coinbase, I spent 5 years at Google. I started working on cloud abuse, Google Cloud. Google has a large suite of cloud products. the EC2 equivalents on et cetera. So my first project was actually detecting and stopping cryptocurrency mining abuse. There's a lot of people, Google gives out $300 free credit. So a lot of people got that $300 free credit, spun up a bunch of VMs and then mined Bitcoin and then pocketed the money. So it is kind of from the opposite perspective, not helping the crypto ecosystem, instead trying to detect and stop these miners. Shortly after that, I worked as the manager of the real-time communications anti-abuse team. So pretty unrelated, I think, to crypto, but I have been interested in anti-abuse and privacy for some time. So it's very much aligned with that. So Google Meets, Google Voice, Android messages. Google has a lot of products that allow some type of real-time communication. And thus, there's a lot of abuse on these products. People trying to send spam text messages, disrupt meetings, etc. So all of this kind of brings me to Paragraph. It's getting somewhere. So during the pandemic, maybe a year and a half ago, during my time at Google, I had a lot of free time on my hands, naturally, just was working from home. So I wanted to start writing more and just broadly growing an audience. I was kind of starting from ground zero on Twitter. I've been writing in some capacity for some time. I've had a personal blog for a little bit. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I was contributing editor also at a small tech publication just on the side. So I've been interested in kind of the intersection between writing and digital media for a little bit, but I wanted to start doing it in a personal capacity a bit more professionally, I guess. So I started tweeting and I went to Substack, started posting on Substack. I think they're kind of the de facto player in the space when it comes to this type of writer to audience communication, long form communication. So grew to a couple hundred Twitter followers, started getting some subscribers in Substack. I quickly started hitting some limitations on the platform. Just a couple off the top of my mind. One, like limited design options. All publications look pretty much the same. Not a whole lot you can do to control branding. Not a whole lot you can do to control UX. Post organization. I think also, you can't add granular categories. If you were like a comic book maker and you wanted to really own sort of the organization and own the branding, it just wasn't possible. But more importantly, I noticed that Substack was moving more and more in the direction of a closed ecosystem. They launched Substack Chat. They launched Substack Forums. They launched a mobile app. They're really encouraging users to read on the mobile app, not through email anymore. And they also have no API. There's no API access. Many of the top Substackers realized that building a multi-pronged community is very important. It's better than building a newsletter, facilitating this interaction between community members and between yourself. But Substack doesn't make it easy to do this outside of their platform, which is why they're launching these features on the platform. So I quickly realized a lot of these platforms, including Substack, they tout portability. You're able to export your email subscribers and take them elsewhere. But what if I wanted to use, for example, Twitter instead of Substack Chat or Discord instead of Substack Forums? There was portability, but there was no interoperability. And even if Substack did offer an API, they're a platform. They're not a credibly neutral protocol. We've seen time and time again that I think platforms can change the rules. Notably Twitter, they used to have a thriving developer ecosystem. A handful of third-party apps started competing directly with the main Twitter clients, and then they shut them off. Another example is like MailChimp, more recently and relevant to this conversation. They realized one day that they did not like crypto customers anymore. So they shut off and killed Masari, Decrypt, and a bunch of other sort of large businesses who were paying customers and who had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. They shut them off with no notice. So I think broadly we've seen how platforms can change the rules. And I wanted to avoid, I think, some of these concerns that I had with the direction that these platforms are moving. So noticing all of this, email is valuable. The direct relationship that gets fostered with an audience and a creator, that's very valuable. The network effects on the platform are valuable, but more functionality, more control, and more guarantees in how I could create, distribute, and monetize my content is what I desired. I didn't want to be forced to kind of deal with the limitations and constraints that these platforms had in place, both from a feature standpoint, but also from a developer standpoint. If I wanted to build on top of something, I want the full sort of flexibility and freedom and guarantees that the underlying rules will not change. So, had all these ideas, I think, of how I could sort of improve upon this. And that ultimately brought me to Paragraph. So Paragraph is kind of focused on 3 core things. There's content creation, there's content distribution, and lastly is monetization. So creators, ultimately, they want to create content. They want to get that content in front of an audience, and they want to make money off that content. I mean, the kind of place where Paragraph differs from standard companies approaching this, we use open and permissionless protocols wherever possible. A couple of examples. I mean, you mentioned one earlier, Arweave. We give users the option of publishing on Arweave, permanent and uncensorable storage. You can ingest it anywhere. You can self-host it if you want. You can display it on your personal website. You can build apps on top of it permissionlessly, entirely with guarantees that you'll always be able to do this. Another example of open and permissionless protocols is decentralized social. We have a handful of integrations with Farcaster, and this is a lot of what we've done is just not possible using Twitter. They just don't allow this using APIs, or they charge exorbitant amounts. So, this decentralized social integration unlocks new means of engagement, distribution, and discovery for creators and for their audience alike. And just lastly, the premise that we're kind of making is that replacing the subscription model with NFTs can lead to a much better sort of ecosystem overall. NFTs are usable across the entire Web3 ecosystem. They could be paid for permissionlessly. And I think most importantly, they're a primitive that can be extended. They can be built on top of. You can bundle them together, group subscriptions together. They can be time limited, revocable, tradable, soul-bound, gifted, recurring, or one-time, or streaming. Like, these are primitives that people can build on top of. I think we have not seen a lot of the power of NFTs. I think a lot of the main use cases today, profile pictures and kind of beyond, some speculative. I think NFTs are a lot more than that. So I think the hypothesis we're making is that by backing these subscriptions as NFTs will allow for a lot of very cool applications being built on top of it. And I also just think ownership would help align incentives as well between writers and readers, lead to even more, supercharged growth and just a better experience for everybody.
Yeah, there's, a lot to unpack here. So like the first thing is I really can feel that you are more design centric than Substack. Obviously, it's easier, when you build something from scratch than if you have legacy ecosystem that you built in 2017 or something. But the UX is so much better. I hate Substack in terms of UX. Really, like I never know what should I click, which is, even though I use it like 100 times. So I really like it, and this flexibility that you can change, the way publication looks. This is super cool. And for me, the options are very interesting because I actually moved to Paragraph because I want to start one experiment soon. I haven't told you, but that's the plan with NFTs. And the thing is that you could, for example, make a newsletter where you have like fixed number of subscribers. So it's like, 10,000 people, just like Bored Apes. And then, it's like people can sell their subscription if they were early to subscribe to you. So for example, if I were early to subscribe to, Lenny's newsletter, the pretty famous one about product management, then I could like resell it and it keeps the audience limited, or they could just reward them with, if you were early, you could get some perks that are not possible for people that were not. So I think it's very useful, and it opens so many opportunities that it's even hard to name all of them. So I'd like to ask you, about Paragraph itself, like, what's the most interesting use cases you've seen so far? The kind of creators using it, or maybe the way they used it that caught your attention?
Yeah, so there's a handful of very interesting use cases that I didn't even know was like a use case, I think. So one was serialized fiction. So there are creators coming onto Paragraph, creating stories, creating fiction, and then they're drawing characters to go along with these stories. And then they're using Paragraph as a way to allow their audience to follow along on how the story develops. And the most interesting part of this is that they ended up minting these characters as NFTs and then allowing their audience to collect these NFTs of characters that really resonated with them. So I had no idea that this was a big thing. I started digging more and more into serialized fiction after this. And I mean, it's a large market internationally in particular. But I like love that. I think that was a fantastic idea. I chatted with this user, and that made me think a lot more about like co-creation in particular. Because what if now the creator's audience can then, using that NFT, continue the story themselves? There could be multiple branches of a story. You could kind of determine how the how the story goes. You could vote depending on what the audience wants in terms of the direction of the story, et cetera. So there's a lot of things that I think are unlocked just part of as this one use case that I had no idea of. Another kind of very interesting use case, the largest NFT community in Indonesia is using Paragraph as a token-gated knowledge base. So they have a website, they have NFTs that they issue, which then grant access to numerous things, including a Discord. And they were looking for a way to host content, like host just text content to help people get onboarded into the world of NFTs. These users don't have a lot of experience like using wallets or using NFTs or anything like that. So they were seeking a platform that ease of use and streamlined UX and all that. But they have no desire really to use Paragraph as a newsletter. They just want a place to token gate content and send their community members there. I also thought that was a pretty interesting use case.
Yeah, regarding this serialized fiction, actually my idea is in these lines, because what I want to do is I want people with NFTs be able to vote where to take the plot. So there will be always like A or B road. So people who hold them can vote. And the more NFTs you have, the more power, voting power you have. So this is a great use case. This project is around like a year old, maybe a year and a half, more or less. But like the product is very sleek. Like it works very fast, very nice. It looks good. And whenever I tell you, hey, Colin, how can I do X? And it turns out that this feature is not there. It takes like 1-2 days and the feature magically arrives. So this is like a crazy fast, level of delivering product features. So I'm wondering, like, how have you done it? How are you able to ship so fast?
Yeah, so I have a handful of thoughts. I'm like a big fan of the lean startup methodology. So building like the minimum viable product, building an MVP, getting in front of users as quickly as possible and talking to those users, seeing how they interact with it. Is it solving their problems? What do they like? What do they dislike? And then iterating as quickly as possible. The MVP, if you're not embarrassed of it, you've waited too long. Like it should be incomplete. It should be kind of hacked together, etc. So I'm a big believer in that. On top of this, I think having tight feedback loops, like the process I just described, like having something in place where you can just repeat this, on very small scales, just keep repeating this, just talking to a user, like you've requested a feature, just talking to you, determining why you want that, and then just launching it the next day, and then, circling back and seeing how you're using it. Having very tight feedback loops so that you can iterate very quickly, I think is super important. In Web3, this might be like a bit of a spicy take, but I think that too many products use like waitlists and sign-up limits and like other methods of gating access, which I think go contrary to the traditional, lean startup methodology. I mean, in certain circumstances, this makes sense. Like for social networks, like Farcaster, for example, if you onboard and open the gates and then the overall quality of the network drops significantly, it's a poor experience for everybody. But I mean, a product like Paragraph, and for a lot of products out there, I mean, this is not the case. So just getting your product in the hands of users as quickly as possible is important. Another thing is prioritizing user happiness, like customer service. I mean, it's easy to do when you're a very small company. I think that's one of the advantages that we have as small companies, we meaning like any small company, over sort of the larger incumbents. Like, I think we've done a very good job at fostering a close-knit group of users. I think in part because when they do request features or when they do request bugs, like we prioritize that and we get that fixed. And then if they know that they can interact directly with the founder of the company and we actually treat them well, then it's a small thing to ask for, but I mean, it goes a long way ultimately. And another thought kind of on the same token is we're a very small team right now. We're 3 people total, myself and 2 others, and we're all engineers. So we all ship, we all build. There's no bureaucracy essentially in place. I mean, naturally this changes with the scale of the company and the scale of the team. Certainly at Google, if we shipped a change, it was used by like 1 billion users in like a week or something. So I mean, naturally there needs to be a lot more bureaucracy in place, but that's another advantage of a very small team, just able to sort of ship quickly.
I would like to iterate on that using your words, that you have some plans, like, some roadmaps, like some sprints probably, or something like this, backlogs. So how, from the like process point of view, it's possible that, I tell you, hey, Colin, could you add subscribes box because I felt that it is missing, and it happens the next day because, I guess that you already have some plans regarding the features. So like, how do you decide to put it on the top of the list?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's worth elaborating on. So it's not like, certainly if somebody requests a feature, we don't drop everything we're doing and then we implement that feature. We would get nothing done. There's an infinite stream of feature requests coming in. But I mean, ultimately, it's a balance between who's asking. If a lot of people are demanding this one feature, and what's the implementation time, like effort? If it takes a half day to implement and everybody's asking for this, it would make a lot of people happy. I mean, that makes sense to implement. Certainly we have we have a roadmap, we have a vision, we have a strategy. If people are requesting features that are not within that strategy, I mean, we need to politely decline. We can't work on them no matter if it make a lot of people happy. But I mean, most features, like if you want something embedded or like the subscribe button, for example, that was already on our roadmap. We wanted to tackle that at some point, and it was relatively quick to implement. So in that circumstance, it does make sense to potentially reprioritize and get this implemented.
Okay. So what I also seen is that, because of these integrations with social that you mentioned with Farcaster, it's really nice when it comes to discovery, because you have this tab, like people I follow on Farcaster, like what have they published, which is a very, very nice feature. So could you tell us more about this integration with social? Because I know that it doesn't end there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a big believer in these decentralized social protocols, or sufficiently decentralized social protocols. I mentioned earlier, but I really think that they do unlock a lot of new ways of engagement, distribution, monetization than what was possible in Web2 using, Twitter APIs, for example. So we've launched, a handful of integrations on Farcaster. So one of them, I mean, as you mentioned, if you connect your wallet address to Paragraph, then we permissionlessly determine, are you a Farcaster user? And if so, we pull in all the followers that you have on Farcaster and then match them with Paragraph publications. And then we display those publications directly. We also give you the option of subscribing to these users, to your followers. On top of that, there's another integration where if you publish a post on Paragraph and then share it on Farcaster, or if other people share it on Farcaster, then we pull in the discussion and display it directly on the post itself. I chatted with a lot of users in Web2, like on Substack, and they realized that, or they mentioned a problem to me, that most of the discussion is happening on Twitter. It's not happening on Substack. People are not logging in and discussing the article directly on Substack. So they were often missing the conversation. Their readers also, like maybe they weren't on Twitter, so maybe they were missing the conversation as well. So that really kind of inspired the integration where we could permissionlessly ingest all these comments. So I think there's a lot that can be done here in general. And I think it's just based on this notion of a wallet and composability and permissionless protocols across the entire crypto ecosystem.
Yeah. And, you have around, per your website, like over 5,000 creators so far. So I'm wondering, like, how have you acquired first users?
So the very first users we got was strictly cold outreach by myself. So, my earlier story about how I started working on Paragraph, I originally was working on this just nights and weekends at Google. I wasn't working on this full time. This was just strictly nights and weekends. So I reached out to a lot of users on Twitter and Hacker News in particular. People were posting on Substack. I was trying to go for people with smaller audiences because the platform was relatively feature complete. And I got them to sign up and poke around. And then again, they told me they needed feature X, or they wanted to do feature Y, but it wasn't possible just yet. So, I incorporated a lot of that feedback. A lot of my first 10 users bounced. They just left the platform. But after a certain point, I continued and started, doing more and more of this cold outreach. And, after a certain point, when the product started getting a lot more developed, then users were sticking around, and then users were sharing it with friends and all of that. So one also important thing to note is that the first version of the MVP, it lacked a lot of functionality, obviously, but notably there was no crypto functionality. The first version of the MVP was just a very basic newsletter platform, focused on speed, focused on minimalism, focused on, good UX. And because of that, I think it resonated a lot with like developers, people who maybe didn't really like sort of the similar thing I expressed earlier about the closed ecosystem of Substack and all of that, and wanted this sort of very streamlined, very easy to use experience. And because of that, because the kind of developers resonated with, Hacker News was sort of a large source of the influx of first 100 users. I was, I think, front page of Hacker News for a little bit, posted on Product Hunt as well, was number 2 or 3 product of the day or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, right now you work a lot with DAOs and like bigger organizations. I even saw friends from Jedi Swap there. So Rohit, like greetings from here. So I'm wondering, like, how it works now. How do you acquire these users now?
Yeah. So there's a handful of things we do now. So one, we continue doing manual outreach, just reaching out on Twitter primarily. I think a lot of folks are asking about, Web3 Substack or decentralized Substack. I think Paragraph's still relatively small. So, naturally, we're not on the radar of a lot of these users. So we just point them to the website and then just try to address their concerns. And that resonates with a lot of folks. I also think a lot of Web2 companies, I would say, are helping us out. MailChimp shut down all these crypto companies. Review closed down, I think yesterday was the last day that people can use Review on Twitter. So like, where else would crypto Twitter go? They could go to Substack, but ultimately they have a desire to use the benefits I mentioned earlier about Paragraph. On top of that, there's just a lot of users in my network in general. I think my investors have been helpful for that. There's a lot of portfolio companies who are either related to DAOs or building infra or what have you. And then they have a desire to reach their audience or to token gate potentially. Another avenue is word of mouth. So kind of like product-led growth, building a good product people want to use, make it very easy to share, make it provide a good customer experience and all that. And people are going to be sort of keen to share with friends and, other people in their network. I think like Farcaster was a great example of this. We launched a handful of those integrations. I'm very active on Farcaster. We provide customer support there and sort of onboarding all the time. And because of that, occasionally there's threads like, where should I blog? And a lot of people are like, oh, Paragraph's like the de facto choice, which I think is just fantastic. That's ultimately aligned with what I'm trying to do in terms of acquiring users. I have not invested in paid customer acquisition. We haven't really done anything in sort of a systematic way. We've kind of been sort of heads down focused on building out the product, ensuring that it's solving a real need. And then, I think in the future, we'll start dialing up growth and marketing in sort of a more systematic way.
I really like, despite the fact that you are like group of 3 engineers, you do so much cold outreach because it's pretty uncommon. Sometimes I feel like it's like in the Silicon Valley TV series that sometimes engineers just want to kind of like grow their startup from their building without talking to anyone. It's obviously a joke, but like, it's not that common for engineers to be, so tenacious when it comes to promoting their stuff. And I think it's very good. And that's how I came across for Paragraph. So it definitely worked for me. So, as you said, you have like product-led growth because, for example, I moved to Paragraph. Someone sees, okay, it looks nice. I can use it. I can subscribe. So whenever I will start blogging, I might use Paragraph. So this is very nice. But I'm wondering about things that you measure and like what are the most important factors in business like that? Because you could like make it pretty simplistic and say, okay, it's about number of users. But, if you have like, I don't know, million creators who have 1 subscriber each, then I guess it's not a success. On the other hand, if you have 1 creator that's pretty big, I guess it might be a bigger success. So I'm wondering, what are the metrics? What are the factors that you look at every week or every month? And how do you measure the growth of the platform?
Yeah, so that's I think you hit the nail on the head with kind of the unique position that companies like Paragraph are in. We can't just look at one side of the marketplace. We can't just look at writers. We can't just look at readers. Ultimately, we need to have a good experience for both. And if our creators start growing and eventually make it big, then we would succeed as a company. So in terms of actual metrics, so just a handful of them, kind of going to list them off. So monthly active writers, monthly active readers, monthly active readers per writer or subscribers per writer. Subscribers per creator, and monthly active delivered newsletters. Those are kind of the core metrics we look at. Reason why it's monthly active is I just think the nature of the products, a Paragraph are going to be posting long form content necessarily every single day compared to tweeting or posting on Farcaster every single day. But I mean, ultimately, we need to provide a good experience for both creators and writers, which is why we look at both metrics kind of jointly. I think revenue is a great metric. I think if we're helping writers get paid and then thus we monetize as a result of that, I think that's the biggest win of all. But yeah, I think it's just a bit early to sort of deeply focus on revenue-based metrics at the point we're at. I think focused on growth and helping writers grow and increase distribution and all of that as a result of decentralized social, before sort of going a bit deeper into the revenue standpoint.
Yeah, I like it that in your business, you're very aligned with writers in a sense that more subscribers writer have, the more users you have at the end of the day. So you also mentioned how many newsletters get delivered. So this is challenging in any mailing business, like how to get your mail inside the inbox and not inside the spam folder. So I'm wondering if you have done any work in that case, Yeah,
so it's challenging, I would say. There's a lot of things that you do, like kind of the base level of things you should implement from like a technical standpoint. Like you shouldn't, have DMARC configured on the domain. You should have DKIM set up. You should have a bunch of things which essentially tell these mailbox recipients, this is good mail. On top of that, if you're sending at a large scale, I think moving into a dedicated IP, like we use SendGrid, for example, for delivering emails. So I think we're doing like north of 100,000, delivered newsletters per month or something like that. At that scale, I think starting to consider dedicated IPs, just so you're not shared with other users who are potentially doing something malicious or doing something spammy, is a good consideration. But I mean, it's challenging. I think there's always going to be people that are reporting that a specific message went into the spam inbox. I think my background in abuse, I would say, is helping here. We've noticed there's a handful of users that join Paragraph, and then they're either trying to abuse from an SEO standpoint, so they're just providing a lot of backlinks to their own website, or they're trying to abuse from a spam standpoint. So they add in 10,000 subscribers to their newsletter and then try to send them spam. So we have a plethora of anti-spam and abuse measures, because if some of these users succeed in sending spam, then that would bring down the reputation more broadly across the entire spectrum of users on Paragraph. So certainly my background in spam and abuse, I think, is helping a bit here.
Yeah. And do you think like in the long run, if you have some big creator, 100K subscribers or like million subscribers, would it be possible to give them like their unique IP? So, it's like they don't even share it with other creators.
Yeah. So SendGrid and I imagine all the other platforms, Amazon SES and beyond, do support this natively. So even going beyond just giving a dedicated IP, you can create like a sub-user, I think SendGrid calls them, and grant them access to SendGrid dashboard to diagnose and troubleshoot availability and all of that. So it's certainly possible.
I'm wondering, because you have integrated wallets at this point, it's like, you can subscribe with your wallet, but I'm wondering like, what are things on the roadmap? Because, as we discussed before the podcast, you have some plans in the long run regarding making wallets more central to the Paragraph UX.
Yeah, definitely. So very quick background. Like from the start, we're taking a deliberate Web 2.5 approach. I think you mentioned that at the start of the podcast, but I mean, that's been a deliberate design decision here. I think not a lot of people have wallets in the world. And I think if you're strictly requiring wallets to subscribe to a newsletter, for example, or to deliver content, I just don't think that's the right approach for adoption. So I really want to keep that in mind. And it's important that if you have an email and you want to start getting into crypto, but maybe you don't have a wallet yet, or you don't have crypto yet, like you'd still be able to take advantage of functionality. So you could sign up using an email right now and then just use Paragraph as, a direct competitor to Substack, for example, without necessarily taking advantage of the crypto functionality. But I do think wallets, like you're going to get the best experience if you connect your wallet to the product. Like Farcaster, the Farcaster integrations, there's a lot more we can do, like Lens protocol in the future, with decentralized social and beyond. It would also be fantastic for on-chain newsletter delivery. I think some of the concerns you mentioned earlier about the spam and abuse folder may be changed, maybe not eliminated entirely. I imagine these protocols are going to have their own issues, but it may be improved upon. There's a lot of players working on like on-chain notifications. I think XMTP is one, EPNS is another. But it'd be fantastic if a user could just open up their wallet like on MetaMask or Coinbase Wallet or what have you. And then there'd be a tab for newsletters or content. And then they'd be able to get these notifications just natively in their wallet. So that's kind of like the longer term direction I'd like to head in.
Just a short break to remind you that if you like this podcast, please don't hesitate to subscribe and give it a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever platform you use. Thanks a lot. I had Harsh Rajat here, co-founder of EPNS, some time ago. And for me, like this idea that you can subscribe to notifications on your wallet, so you can be totally anonymous when it comes to subscribing to newsletters, but also paying people for their work. Like I can imagine that you live in Iran and you want to subscribe to a newsletter that's discussing the government, and you don't want to use your email provider because they can track you down. If you could use it from wallet, then, these kind of movements might be able to really be more independent from governments and so on. So I'm really happy to see it coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're very excited about it. I just think, right now the adoption is just not there. And I think the feature set is just not there. I've had a handful of calls with XMTP, for example, and I think they're making a lot of progress, but just when I had a call with them about 8 months ago, it was a bit early, I think.
Yeah. And then could you tell us how it works technically right now? I mean, this wallet, social media plus newsletter integration, how they communicate each other? When it comes to Farcaster, do you just use their API, or does it work in any different manner?
So users can sign up with Paragraph using either their email address or their wallet. And then as soon as you sign up, you can then add the other. So if you sign up using a wallet, you connect your wallet, then you can then add an email address. We've actually noticed that most people do both, I think. So after the wallet is added to your account, then for the Farcaster integration in particular, we use a combination of the Searchcaster APIs. It's basically like a layer on top of the underlying Farcaster APIs. They just make a few things easier, created by Greg on Farcaster. So we use a combination of that as well as the official Farcaster APIs. So given a wallet address, we can pull up, which Farcaster account it's connected to. And then given that Farcaster ID, we're able to pull in the followers, we're able to pull in essentially everything, and then get those connected accounts and then just map that to the Paragraph accounts. So it's just a handful of lookups, I think, that we're doing across both the Searchcaster as well as the Farcaster APIs. And for the discussion integration, the things that we're pulling in, the discussion on Farcaster that we're pulling in directly to the post, it's a similar story. So, given a post URL, we could just query Farcaster directly and then, say, was this post ever talked about on Farcaster? And then we'd be able to pull in those comments, we'd be able to pull in the replies, we just link it directly, etc. So that feature was actually relatively straightforward to build, at least compared to some of the discoverability stuff, because it was effectively one lookup on one or two APIs.
Yeah, what I really like about this answer is that, Dan and Varun and the Farcaster team didn't need to build the best gateway to Farcaster, because you already use Searchcaster, which is an app on top of that. So it really plays into this interoperability node that we discussed, that even you as a product builder can just use one app on top of the other app and on top of the other app to build something better without having to start from scratch and kind of reinvent the wheel. So this is really cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's one of the benefits that I'm seeing come to fruition in Web3. It's this notion of composability. Even within Paragraph, I think one of the most surprising insights that I've had is that developers are eager and able-bodied to build on top of what you're doing. We don't have APIs. We have content on Arweave and we support NFTs for token gating content. But just given that, developers have built tons of stuff on top of Paragraph. Somebody pinged me a week ago and then said, hey, I built streaming payments into my Paragraph publication. And then I was like, how did you do that? We don't support streaming payments. how did you do that? So I hopped on a call with him. He added Superfluid support, Superfluid streaming payment protocol, added it to a custom smart contract, and then played around with how we ingest NFTs in our UI. We require NFTs to have sort of a certain schema adhering to like the NFT schema, ERC 721 schema. So he like played around with it and modified the smart contract, even though it wasn't a true NFT, to meet that schema. So then he could import that into Paragraph and then gate content with that. And then his readers would be required to set up a streaming payment flow to him in order to access his content. So we had this demo. He did a hackathon for Superfluid, and then the Superfluid team I met with after, they were also equally sort of excited about this. But that's just one example of something that I didn't even expect. And the developer just built this and then told us after the fact, because it's a totally listen and composable ecosystem.
Yeah. So could we expand on that? Like, what are the things that surprised you the most when building that? Because as you like when you start up, you start with, listing your assumption, hypothesis, and so on. So what were the ones that you had to modify that, you thought the reality is like this, but it turned it's quite different than what you have thought?
Yeah. So one is that I've read a lot of horror stories about how it's challenging for companies build APIs, and then it's very challenging for them to get developers to actually build on top of those APIs. That was like a hypothesis that I had, going into building Paragraph. And that's also why we didn't really prioritize developer docs. Like, we still to this day don't really have a lot of public facing APIs, beyond the sort of Web3 composability I mentioned through NFTs and what have you. But I think we've been very fortunate that that has not been the case. We've had significant developer interest. We've had, the Superfluid person I just mentioned, extremely keen on building on top of it, and then just did without telling us. Unlock protocol. Somebody built a website around their token gated newsletter and then integrated Unlock protocol into similar thing into their NFT. So now they can accept recurring payments through Unlock protocol for this NFT. And again, they did that without even telling us. It's just strictly working based on composability. So certainly it was a lot easier than I originally anticipated to get developers to build on top of this. And even like the Arweave ingestion, we get people all the time saying they want to either self-host their posts elsewhere, or they're building, I had a call with somebody yesterday, they're building like a professional network. So you log in with your wallet, and then it just pulls in everything in the crypto ecosystem of things that you've done that you may want to showcase to potential employers. So, you could imagine a writer seeking freelance jobs. They would just pull in content from Paragraph automatically and then display that kind of as a Web3 native resume. So they're very eager on building on top of Paragraph. And I also kind of think this speaks to just how powerful NFTs are as sort of a primitive. I had a hypothesis going into building Paragraph that NFTs could be used beyond kind of the main use cases. And I was very optimistic about it, but I don't think that's historically happened in terms of mainstream usage across Web3 dapps. But I think we're starting to see some of this kind of come to fruition. And hopefully, Paragraph helps pioneer a lot of these use cases going forward. But that was certainly an assumption that I had. And it's kind of good to see it starting to get validated.
Yeah. This sounds really interesting, because I think it's like very Web3 kind of thing that we have so many developers here that are so open-minded about connecting Lego blocks with each other, that it might be easier to do it than in Web 2, because this developer density is totally different than in Web 2. And also, your product is very nice for developers because it's a very broad design space. Like, you can do many things here. So big fan of that. So I'm wondering, what were the biggest challenges so far? What was the hardest thing to do?
So there's a handful. I think one biggest maybe growth challenge, I would say, I imagine a lot of, if not every early stage company, experiences this, but determining what are the right features to build for the right audience. We started Paragraph thinking, should we build content creation for DAOs specifically, or maybe for NFT communities specifically, or maybe just writers that are interested in migrating from Substack. But the feature set for all of these is different. Like maybe DAOs have a desire to embed snapshot voting in their newsletters, and they would never mint NFTs on platform. They have their own, whereas writers would not have their own NFTs. They would want to mint on platform, et cetera. So determining like what the right feature set to build is and who the right audience to build for is. Another challenge, I think crypto UX is just a bit hard, a bit challenging in general to onboard, to get. I mean, if you're operating on a chain that you're not familiar with, if you're using, you need Optimism, but you've never used Optimism, you need Matic, you've never used Polygon, it's challenging. So I think just that combined with like the Web 2.5 desire that we had led to a lot of kind of design challenges that we're still facing today. Like, for example, if a user subscribes with a wallet and they don't have an email address added, like, what do we do? If a user wants to buy an NFT, but they don't have a crypto wallet added, like, what do we do? Et cetera. And, even determining what chains to use and all of that is challenging. And lastly, just a technical challenge. Emails they're not good, to put it nicely. I mean, you mentioned earlier, there's a bunch of challenges with spam, but even beyond that, the HTML and CSS in an email, they support ultra limited subsets of what you can do on the web. So yeah, we've spent a lot of time making the editor look very good. We've added a bunch of integrations and all of that. But for every single thing we add, we also then need to add a separate thing for the email. Like if we add an NFT embed, like what will that NFT embed look like in the email? And then we design it, but then it doesn't work because you need to use tables or something in emails. So it's, like we're having a lot of, we always face challenges, I think, with some of our email from like a technical standpoint.
And just like you said, at the start, that the first iteration was like a very raw MVP. And I'm not sure whether I've seen the first iteration, but I've seen like the early one. And I was like, not a big fan, but when I've seen it a few weeks ago, I was like, oh my God, like this is the tool I've been looking for so long. So this is a great thing that happened in the last year. So if you are not building Paragraph, let's say, 2 years ago, you're in your room, bored, and you decide, okay, I may build anything, but not free media or Web3 newsletter. What would you build?
I'm a big fan of consumer-facing products in general. So it'd likely be something in the B2C space. I've worked on a lot of projects, over the past decade plus, originally just on the Bitcoin node back in 2011, and then Ethereum, and then built a handful of things just on the side since then. And they're nearly all B2C. Some things that I'm interested in, like personal finance and financial education. Just a big fan of optimizing, tax advantage accounts, like what equities to hold where, like what exposure should you have to XYZ. My time at Google, I chatted with a lot of other employees at Google and everyone was relatively a high earner, but I realized that a lot of folks were not experienced in this. Like they don't have a good idea of where to save money. Google provided a lot of avenues that are just not accessible elsewhere, like mega backdoor Roth IRAs and everything. And a lot of people were not taking advantage of it because they didn't know about it. So some type of potentially automated personal finance management that helped people, save and grow their money would be, I'm very interested in. On like a completely different note, developer tooling. I'm, been a developer for a very long time. I try out a lot of new technologies. I play around with a lot of things, and I am a big fan of productivity and sort of streamlining things wherever possible. So I think in my like day-to-day workflow right now, using certain tools, they could be improved upon in certain ways. So potentially building something around developer tooling and productivity would be great. A handful of other kind of random things. I mean, the creator economy I'm very interested in, anti-abuse and privacy, preferably both together, like privacy preserving anti-abuse. I was doing at Google. I loved it. I think it's for a very, very good cause. And I think there's a lot of interesting challenges to face at scale, which really appeals to me. And health and wellness as well. I'm a big fan of tracking metrics wherever possible. And I go for runs. I try to work out relatively often. And so just seeing the progression and motivation and all of that is very appealing to me. And I think that a lot of the systems for making use of these metrics they don't exist right now. So
so you definitely have at least like 40 years of being entrepreneur on your roadmap, many ideas to build. So, coming back to Web3, like if you had a magic wand and could fix one thing, what would you fix?
So I'm going to give you a cop-out answer and say several things. So one, like airdrop hunters and speculators, we launched an NFT to commemorate an integration like a week ago. We tweeted about it. We posted on Farcaster and beyond. It was well received generally. And then the NFT was collected by 100 people or what have you. But then on Twitter, it got caught by maybe these Telegram groups of people seeking free airdrops. And then that drew in a steady stream of very low quality users to Discord. And the conversation on Twitter did not center around the integration. It then centered around Paragraph launching an airdrop in the future. We've been clear, we're not launching airdrops. Like I want the focus to be on the product quality, not on speculation. So that was a very poor experience. The Discord, everyone was asking when we're dropping a token, received a bunch of emails around the same thing. Ultimately, I think there's over 8,000 collectors on the NFT. And there was maybe, 50 retweets on my original post, but then there's like thousands of retweets on all these other airdrop hunting posts. So that was a poor experience, I think. Another thing, which I think, Mac, you mentioned a couple of days ago on Farcaster, I agree with. I just think there's not a lot of useful apps in Web3 right now. I don't think there's a compelling reason to move away from Web2 products onto Web3. I think a lot of people are making strides in that direction. I think Farcaster is making a case to move away from Twitter. I think Paragraph's in the early stages of making a case to move away from some of these other platforms, but there's a lot more that can be done here. So I'm excited to kind of see how this unfolds and see how some of these products continue to get built upon and utilized. And lastly, I think just easier UX and onboarding in general. I tried to onboard my friends and family and stuff. I think if people are very motivated to do something, then they will onboard. They will go through a lot of different steps to do so. But ideally, making those steps as easy as possible would increase the chances of people onboarding, maybe if they're not ultra motivated, but they're kind of interested. So that's kind of in part by why I'm trying to make such a good focus of UX and ease of use into the Paragraph onboarding. But I think those three things I would fix.
So I got one question about other projects because we are talking about useful apps. So what are your favorite Web3 projects or something that just caught your attention?
Yeah, so Farcaster. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion with Farcaster this podcast, but I think from like a technical standpoint and building out the open standpoint, from a developer standpoint who's built on Farcaster, I mean, it's fantastic. And I think they're taking a lot of the right approaches in terms of growth, deliberate growth and everything. So that's great. I really like a lot of the products built on top of Farcaster, like Launchcaster is one. Moving towards like the product hunter hacker news of Web3. I've discovered a lot of new products there. I think that's fantastic. I asked maybe a month ago, like, where else can I discover new products in Web3? And nobody really had a great answer. So I don't think there's other alternatives. So I think Launchcaster is doing a fantastic job here so far. Unrelated to Farcaster, Royal. I think from a UX perspective, I really admire what they're doing. If you go to their landing page, there's no mention of NFTs at all.